Katerina Jaka watched the German soldiers flee. Streaming from the east, that's what she was seeing. Allied bombers flew above them. She thought they all might die, and then soon there was the silence of all the SS men. When the sun rose the next morning, it was the 1st of May, and they all sang the Internationale. They all sang the Internationale. Katerina Jaka saw red flags flapping in the breeze above the Russian tanks, and she fell upon her knees. And so many different voices in so many different tongues sang the most beautiful song that could ever have been sung. In German, Lithuanian, in Polish and in Dutch, a myriad of melodies has never had been such. In Russian and in Yiddish, Italian and French, emerging from the forests beneath the trench. When the sun rose the next morning, it was the 1st of May, and they all sang the Internationale. When the sun rose the next morning, it was the 1st of May, and they all sang the Internationale. They all sang the Internationale. Völker hört die Signale auf zum letzten Gefecht. Die Internationale erkämpft das Menschenrecht. Völker hört die Signale auf zum letzten Gefecht. Die Internationale erkämpft das Menschenrecht.
Hello and welcome to Revolutionary Socialist Review. This is Chris Driscoll, and along with me is my cohort, my partner in crime, and our co-host, Rainer Shea. How are you, Rainer?
Today I saw a piece of news that really encapsulated the gravity of our situation with the pandemic and the state's reaction to the pandemic. You might have seen that it might have been just in this last day or so that this Florida scientist was threatened by the police as ordered by Governor Ron DeSantis for telling the public the truth about COVID-19 data. This is the governor of Florida, so determined to cover up the real numbers for COVID that he's sending police into people's homes to point guns at their families and children. They pointed guns at the scientists' children to get into, so that they could get upstairs. It might have been so that they could get upstairs to the computer and seize the hardware so that this data couldn't be published online anymore. This is the nature of the state's reaction. This is the nature of the shift towards fascism that we face. It's where this state, or mainly the more reactionary parts of the state, are doing everything they can to minimize the crisis, even though around 250,000 people in the U.S. have died from this virus so far. They're trying to placate the public by outright erasing the truth, by making these numbers not available. And it's so crazy, and it's so alarming. What is this leading to? Where will this head towards as crises like COVID-19 continue to to grow more severe in the coming years. COVID-19 is just the beginning, I think, of the series of pandemics that we'll face as the planet continues to warm and as the environment gets more suitable for these kinds of diseases.
Yeah, it really, it's going to promote it, certainly, a warmer environment. This is astounding. I think I might have heard a little something about this on the news, but not much. It's astounding. We're running in. You notice we're running into censorship everywhere. That's a good indicator of where the capitalist ruling class wants to take us as a society. We have a story later this evening about what's going on in France, for example, where they are trying to make it illegal to film police engaged in police brutality. And the whole country's erupted. I mean, the whole country for weeks has been protesting against this. And then on top of that, there was a film just recently of a reporter who was beaten and kicked and just battered and bashed by the French cops. I think this was in Paris. I'll talk about this later, but it's just an indication of where the capitalist ruling class in the hegemon, in the global center, the belly of the beast, as we call it, the United States, the U.S. empire, the American empire, but everywhere where the American empire oppresses and rules or leads, this is going on. It's really ridiculous, and hopefully people start standing up to it more and more, like they're doing in France. Yeah, it's terrible. Yeah, we need to delve into that more. Anyway, the show tonight, we start off with a little item from the Global Times. This is a Global Times editorial. I'm going to read you a little bit of it. Trump team, they call it a team, I call it a regime. Trump team aims to control White House. The ongoing Trump regime on Thursday committed several offenses and acts of war against China, including reducing the U.S. Visitor visa's validity period for Communist Party of China members and their families from 10 years to 1 month, and blacklisting 4 Chinese companies, including chipmaker SMIC and oil producer CNOOC, and the intelligence chief John Ratcliffe published a hysterical anti-China op-ed in the Wall Street Journal. He wrote that China is the greatest threat to democracy and freedom worldwide since World War II, and that China robs U.S. companies of their intellectual property, replicates the technology, and then replaces U.S. firms in the global marketplace. He said China has even conducted human testing on members of the People's Liberation Army in hope of developing soldiers with biologically enhanced capabilities. Ratcliffe adopted the same approach as Hollywood superhero Captain America to China. On Fox News, he sent a message to the Biden team asking the new administration to view China as the greatest national security threat we face. The Trump regime is insanely rolling out new anti-China policies in a bid to harm the Chinese people. They are using the remaining weeks to damage the next 4 years of U.S.-China relations to the greatest extent. Given the importance of China-U.S. relations to human peace, what the current U.S. administration is doing is not only politically irresponsible, but also anti-human. In a nutshell, they are committing a crime. And I have to agree with the Global Times 100%. The Global Times, of course, is the Chinese Communist Party's tabloid daily, put out mainly for the working class to read. And its English edition is, I think, pretty good and well worth checking into. But Rainer Shea, what are your thoughts on this matter?
It sounds like the Trump team is worried that Biden will reverse some of the Cold War escalations that the Trump team has made, though this is probably exaggerated in some capacity since we see how the Republicans are now painting Biden as China's puppet, and they're going to paint Biden as soft on China the same way the Democrats painted Trump as soft on Russia. It's like a total partisan like a partisan reversal of everything that happened in the weeks before Trump came into office, with Obama and the Democrats working to set the stage for anti-Russian escalations that would last these next 4 years before they would probably be able to get a Democrat back into office. And in both cases, there's some blind spots going on. There's some exaggerations of how soft the opposing party has been on these respective countries, but the overall goal is the same: to escalate this process of Cold War escalations and economic warfare, military encirclement, and hybrid warfare, like foreign destabilization efforts through agencies like the National Endowment for Democracy. And during the Trump years, the Democrats were able to pressure Trump into carrying out quite a lot of the Cold War escalations against Russia that these Cold Warriors wanted. Like, he tightened sanctions a bunch, and he was willing to give weapons to the Ukrainian nationalists who were fighting against Russia, and he continued the military buildup, as well as the nuclear arms race buildup, which will no doubt continue throughout the Biden years. It's a pendulum swing that's emerging throughout the era of great power competition that the U.S. has been in throughout this last decade. It seems like it was around 2010 or so that the U.S. really shifted from the war on terror primarily to a great power competition. Obviously, the war on terror is still going on, but now great power competition seems to be the war machine's primary point of propaganda and point of anxiety. They're really, really anxious to militarily encircle and wage economic warfare and destabilize Russia and China.
Yes, and we'll have more on this topic and later in the show. Trump, by the way, has enacted or issued through executive order more than 250 new sanctions against Russia, against the Russian Federation. And that's not including all of those that the Obama regime issued during its term as the emperor, or during his term as the emperor of the American Empire. Yeah, number 2 on the list. With rent freezes about to expire, Mnuchin lobbies for more Wall Street bailouts. Imagine that. By January 2021, renters in America will owe $34 billion to their landlords, according to a global investment bank and advisory firm, Stout. That's the name of the firm. More than half of the eviction moratoriums enacted to avoid an upsurge in homelessness during COVID-19 lockdowns have been rescinded, including a federal moratorium that expired in July. Rent and landlord relief programs across the country take up the lion's share of the CARES Act funding allocations, with states like Virginia having already spent 38% of the money reserved for renters by early November. As the money runs out and the December 31 CARES Act cutoff date approaches, states are fumbling to keep enough cash in their coffers to stem the tidal wave of evictions that are at the doorstep and leaking through profusely. The CDC extended rent and mortgage moratorium to the end of the year when it expired in July. However, there were several loopholes to prematurely drive people out of their homes because the CDC order only applies to non-payment of rent, which allows landlords to bring an eviction case on virtually any other grounds, such as excessive noise or trash. In addition, the CDC made the process more onerous for tenants seeking to avail themselves of moratorium protections by giving landlords the right to challenge the veracity of their claims. In other words, these landlords are just lying in court, going to other methods to get these people kicked out during the COVID plague. So it's going to be kind of dire come January. There's going to be at least a period from January 1st to January 20th when Biden becomes the new emperor, in which there's no protections for people, and all of those people who are behind on their rent, behind on their mortgages, can be kicked out of their homes. It may be a disaster in the making, will be, unless the Trump regime decides to do something about it, at least to extend the moratorium until Biden becomes the new emperor. In the meantime, a lot of people are going to lose their homes. It's looking pretty disastrous. So, and who knows what Biden's going to do? I mean, wasn't it Biden who said nothing's going to change? Don't worry, and went to all the Wall Street billionaires to reassure them that he would not be doing anything to harm their interests. So, anyway, what are your thoughts, Rainer?
It's a continuation of the trend that I've been observing lately, especially since the beginning of this year's economic crash, which technically began last year, like around the fall. It's a continuation of the trend towards extreme inequality within the United States, where the lower class communities are having their living standards really become deteriorated? Will the upper classes continue to build up their high-tech, shiny metropolises within the hearts of these urban centers mainly? And of course, they're also building up their luxury doomsday bunkers and more isolated places. And it's part of the larger process of turning the lower class areas, sometimes called the red zones, into these sacrifice zones for when climate change hits. When climate change really ramps up, will this is happening, the green zones, the wealthy zones, will be the places that remain safe. And this is the harsh truth of the so-called Fourth Industrial Revolution. Today I saw an ad on YouTube from a company, I think it's called Lumen, that said, "Welcome to the Fourth Industrial Revolution." I don't know exactly what they were advertising, but the general idea of the Fourth Industrial Revolution, as advertised by these Washington think tanks and corporations and capitalist technocrats, is that throughout the 2020s and onwards, society is going to experience this vast technological boom, the introduction of innovations like self-driving cars and going beyond the need for in-person shopping. You can just have packages delivered to your house the whole way, and potentially some kind of new currency or something crazy conspiracy-like along those lines. And this ties into the so-called smart cities, which is an idea that's been gaining more traction throughout COVID-19 amid the necessity for change up in how our daily lives work. So as these new technologies get introduced, and as these technocrats advertise it as this great leap forward for humanity, the main people who benefit from these technologies, from the positive aspects of these technologies, will be the rich. The poor will be the ones who bear the brunt of the dystopian aspects of technology, of the dark side of technology. They'll be the ones surveilled and policed. They'll be targeted by a techno tyranny from an already highly militarized police state. You probably remember us discussing an agency that was created in 2018, and let's see, I don't remember the name of it, but it has something to do with national security, along with artificial intelligence, and it's about using artificial intelligence to expand the surveillance state like never before. This one Mint Press news article, which describes how COVID-19 is being used by these corporations to sell mass artificial intelligence powered surveillance, says that one of this agency's documents says that the streets should one day be blanketed with cameras, and that this will be good for business, no doubt, in addition, good for policing the lower classes. So this is the nature of the class divisions that are emerging as all these people get kicked out of their homes, and as the upper classes continue to consolidate wealth. This is the nature of the near future, that these urban areas and that all facets of our civilization will come to look like. It'll be divided between the smart cities and what the Pentagon is calling feral cities, feral zones, where the military and the militarized police will be routinely called in to try to put down potential uprisings.
Yeah, it's pretty dystopian, isn't it? And this is not just happening to the lower classes. to the poor. It's happening to the working class particularly. The working class has been clobbered and pushed down into the gutter. Working poor, not just working poor. I mean, working class people who've had a relatively close to a middle class income and middle class life are being pushed down and pushed out of their homes, pushed out of their, homes that they worked enslaved to be able to buy. And even to the middle class, this is happening, to the managerial class. This is happening across the board to everybody except for the capitalist, class. And, small businesses are being clobbered through this COVID-19 plague. This has really been bad, and I predict it'll get worse, a lot worse. Wait till Christmas, and Christmas is going to be the worst Christmas ever for people, or at least the worst Christmas ever in people's memory. I don't remember another time during the holiday seasons when things have been this dire and looking this dire. And yes, the ruling class, the capitalist class, in other words, is taking advantage of this to advance, to put in place a fascistic police state. Of course, there's already a police state, but to ramp that up. I mean, in the past, we've had a liberal police state, a police state that it targeted mostly people who were on the periphery of society, the fringe of society, so that most people were unaware of it. That's going to change now. This police state is vastly expanding at this time. At the same time, when millions of people in just the last half a year have been coming out into the streets protesting this police state. It's as though the working class, which is always in advance of most of the so-called Marxist-Leninist organizations in this country, that still have their heads so far up the Democrat Party ass they can't see what's going on with the working class. But the working class has already moved into motion against this, and I predict will continue to do so. So this, as Marx and Engels, I should say, predicted in the Communist Manifesto, all class societies are a history of class warfare, of class struggle. And we're going to see class struggle like we haven't seen in a long time, in my opinion. That's what I see coming. So anyway, yes. Onward to topic number 3, which is total shutdown of dissent is U.S. censorship's endgame. Rainer Shea.
In 2016, which appropriately is the year when the current government censorship campaign in the U.S. really started to ramp up, the U.S. Army War College published this report that discussed prospects for fighting in battles that they described as contemporary Stalingrads. They said that that there's a real possibility that in the near future, as poverty, unemployment, natural disasters really cause chaos within the United States, the military will have to be sent in to try to restore order. And in order to restore order, they say they're going to have to control the flow of information. This document describes ways that the military will have to shut down the internet in these occupied areas and implicitly make it so that the only news that the people in the occupied areas can access is official U.S. military propaganda. And it got really creepy and direct when this report described how the military is going to have to track down, monitor, keep track of the people who they describe along the lines of, they describe these people along the lines of online opinion makers who have the potential to sway public opinion against the favor of the military. So basically any journalists who might utilize this opportunity to expose the war crimes that the military might be committing within these impoverished, destabilized areas, they're going to have to crack down on those journalists. Whether this will involve the kind of routine censorship that we're typically seeing today, or a shutdown of the internet within the general areas, or something like what happened these last couple days in the home of this scientist who was basically raided by the governor's goons, and had guns pointed at their children, so that they could confiscate their hardware and deprive the public of this crucial data. We can easily imagine stuff like this happening plenty of times in the near future, and especially if things get hectic, if the military decides to intervene in New York, New Orleans, Los Angeles, San Francisco. Who the hell knows where's the first place that they'll intervene? But if things get really hectic, really unstable, then the U.S. government is going to impose the kind of ultra censored, dictatorial dystopia that U.S. propaganda claims that North Korea is like. I mean, the U.S. imperialist propaganda endlessly describes North Korea as this place with no freedom of speech, where the people are brainwashed and deprived of any freedom to speak out, which obviously isn't true. But ironically, the military has had plans for a little while now to impose that exact same kind of dystopia on the American people.
Yeah, it's a dire situation. And the incredible thing is the American capitalist class has tried to do everything possible to avoid meeting even the minimum requirements for a nation that were requested by the United Nations and the Paris Accords and the other climate mitigation accords. And you know, Obama refused to sign them. There was no chance that Trump would do anything over that. So, yeah, things are only going to get worse. And yet, they're getting ready to use it as a way to oppress and repress the working class. It's just a terrible situation. People really need to wake up, get woke, as the liberals say. Get woke. People really need to get woke about this. Seriously. Very, very, very tragic. Okay, topic number 4, the assassination of a nuclear scientist in Iran and the war against Iran's COVID-19 vaccine. This is a story. Trying to remember where this came from. Well, I'll find out later. Assassination of an Iranian scientist was a U.S. Zionist MEK plot. Mnuchin Fakhrizadeh, let's get that down, one of Iran's most senior nuclear scientists, was assassinated in his car November 27th on the outskirts of Tehran. State sources in the Islamic Republic say he was killed with a remote control remote-controlled machine gun that was being controlled via satellite. While no party has taken responsibility, the Iranian government has already pointed the finger at a number of suspects, chiefly Israel, the United States, and the People's Mujahideen of Iran, commonly known as the MEK, which is a Washington-funded terrorist organization attempting to overthrow the Iranian government. Yet no party has claimed responsibility for the attack. At least 5 other nuclear scientists in Iran have been assassinated in the last decade. At Fakhrizadeh's funeral, Defense Minister Amir Hatami vowed that no crime as great as this would go unpunished, and that the killing would not hinder Iran's nuclear program. Fakhrizadeh was a deputy defense minister and head of Iran's COVID-19 vaccine program. Iran has not yet decided how to respond to this act of terrorism by the American empire and its allies in the Zionist-occupied Palestine and the MEK. Iran is calling it an act of war, and of course, under international law, that is exactly what it is. So, what are your thoughts, Rainer?
I'm glad to hear that it's not hindering the nuclear program. It's pretty clear that that's them targeting this scientist, this nuclear scientist, is a seemingly desperate attempt to sabotage Iran's development, both scientifically and in general, because it's pretty clear that the U.S. and Israel and the MEK are not going to be able to overthrow Iran's government. They've been trying to do this for something like 40 years, and Iran is continuing to grow stronger as the shift towards a multipolar world continues. So Iran is going to be just fine. And this seems to have become apparent fairly recently, though, because I recall a talk from Michael Parenti made in 2012 where Parenti predicted that even though the U.S. Wouldn't dare launching an Iraq-style invasion against Iran, the U.S. is probably going to go into Iran and try to do to the country what it did to Yugoslavia, bombing in selective places in order to sabotage the country's infrastructure and destabilize the country and break it up, with the eventual goal of destroying any anti-imperialist presence. So this is the vision, the dark vision that Parenti had in 2012 for Iran. But what's happened since then? The Trump administration has given it their all in trying to economically destroy Iran and trying to create some kind of situation where they've sabotaged the Iran nuclear deal and escalated the situation towards war, and they've assassinated Soleimani, and now they've done this. but the fact remains that Iran is way too strong for the U.S. to be able to militarily defeat in an invasion. And if they haven't tried the Yugoslavia strategy for Iran so far, it's pretty hard to imagine them doing it at any time in the future. There's something about the whole situation that's just too scary for the imperialists to try in Iran what they tried successfully in Yugoslavia. The factors just aren't in their favor.
I agree, 100%. Okay, next on the list, France's new security law may have just sparked a George Floyd moment, according to a Mint Press article by Alan McLeod. And oh, by the way, that podcast I was just talking, or it was a podcast, the thing on the Iranian nuclear scientist, that was also from Mint Press, where Mint Press is real popular with us tonight. So, France. Huge protests against an onerous new censorship bill awaiting Senate approval have raged across France for weeks, and things just got worse for the embattled President Emmanuel Macron when award-winning Syrian photographer Amir al-Halbi, I think is the way you pronounce it, was brutally beaten by police in front of cameras. His head was heavily bruised and damaged. Blood covered his face, arms, and much of his body. Lengths of cotton wool were stuffed up his broken nose. The new laws pushed through by the Macron regime and passed by France's National Assembly mean that sharing images of al-Halbi or other victims of police brutality might soon be illegal. They say might soon be because it hasn't yet passed the French Senate, but it has passed the French National Assembly, which is roughly equatable to the American House of Representatives. Article 24 of the country's new national security bill specifically outlaws the publishing and dissemination of images of police that undermine their physical or psychological integrity, whatever the fuck that is, and is punishable with a fine of up to 45,000 euros and up to 1 year in jail. And I'd point out at this point, there are several states in the United States that have already passed similar bills, basically making it illegal for citizens or for journalists to record and publish videos of this kind of common police brutality. Not just common here in America, as we already know, but common throughout Europe as well, obviously. The bill specifically states that filming police in such a manner would be against the law, but questions have been raised about how liberally authorities would interpret the nebulous language of the new edict. Media unions and human rights groups warned that it could prevent journalists from documenting police abuses. And, you know, just from my experience watching this, the level of protest across France right now, it's reaching the point where governments fall. So keep an eye on this, and we should keep an eye on this. And you know, ever since the Yellow Jackets started coming out, what was that, like 2 years ago, the French working class has more and more moved into action and against a host of crimes against the people, crimes against the working class, especially by Macron. And of course, Macron becoming president had a lot to do with this. So, Rainer?
I'm thinking of the kinds of rationales that the government could be using to try to pass such an obviously tyrannical and obviously unnecessary law. It's so obvious that this is excessive, that this is just a loophole for suppressing dissent. I wonder if they could try to point to this viral video from a couple months ago of these people in the UK filming a cop who had his pants down. He was hanging from his pants down upside down, and it was obviously a fake video. There were so many indications that it was just fake and made for sensation. But I wonder if someone could try to point to that and say, well, look at how our cops are being victimized. They need this protection.
I don't know. I don't know.
Anyway, this is the latest step in the trend that we've been seeing lately, particularly in the US, the UK, and France, towards a tyrannical police state. The parallel law to this is this piece of legislation, very disturbing legislation, that is, I don't know if it's passed in the UK so far, but it would give the police impunity to rape and murder in the same way that the Gestapo had impunity to do these things. I've got to keep track of this law because it's really alarming.
Yeah,
and it's a parallel to what's happening in France.
it is. It is. Okay. Popular culture legitimizes U.S. imperialist atrocities. Another one by Rainer Shea.
Lately, Borat has made a big comeback. Sacha Baron Cohen has made another big mark upon American popular culture with his Borat subsequent movie film, where which has the infamous Rudy Giuliani compromised position scene, and what commentators aren't really talking about is the fact that 8 years ago, Sacha Baron Cohen made a film that really only served to legitimize the U.S. NATO empire's horrendous atrocity against the Libyan people. In 2011, NATO invaded Libya and turned it from the richest democracy in Africa to a failed state that's overrun by civil war and by slave trade markets. It's really one of the great crimes of history. And in 2012, Sacha Baron Cohen made this awful comedy, so-called satire, that was meant to mock Gaddafi and that mocked the Libyan people in a racist way, even though this fictional country wasn't technically named Libya. It was a North African dictatorship with a goofy, crazy leader whose mission in life was to attack Israel with nuclear weapons, and he did his shtick in this regard, and it's really disgusting how popular culture like this legitimizes in the American mind atrocities like what the Obama-Hillary administration did to Libya in 2011, and it parallels what popular culture like 2014's The Interview has done with North Korea. The Interview is really infamous among anti-imperialists because it was directly produced by the CIA. It was produced in cooperation directly with the CIA and the State Department. And it had Seth Rogen and James Franco infiltrate North Korea and assassinate Kim Jong-un under the pretense of having an interview. So that was the gimmick. And it was disgustingly racist and insulting in every way. And it again was marketed under the satire label. I think in order for a thing to be legitimate political satire, it has to be satirizing something that's actually real. Its points of criticism have to be based upon real things that should be taken seriously. And in the case of both The Interview and The Dictator, that's the name of Sacha Baron Cohen's 2012 movie, all the critiques that they made were just based upon lies and racist propaganda. And this is the situation that we're at in 2020, where people like Sacha Baron Cohen are able to poke fun at American society and expose the undercurrent of bigotry that exists within America. Much of Borat's subsequent movie film is about Sacha Baron Cohen goading ordinary Americans into agreeing with outrageously racist statements to point out how messed up our society is. Yet, at the same time, Sacha Baron Cohen has promoted racism with his film The Dictator, and has helped legitimize these kinds of horrible foreign policy actions that the U.S. takes in order to advance the interests of foreign capital. We're going to continue to see this kind of propaganda and so-called satire in service of advancing imperialist interests, particularly when it comes to Maduro and Assad and Kim Jong-un, because unlike Gaddafi, these leaders have been able to overcome all of the attempts at overthrow that the imperialists have thrown at them.
Yeah, certainly, definitely. Yeah, this is an old story in a way, because these asswipes have been using Hollywood, plastic culture, and other entertainments to accomplish their evil doing for quite some time now. I mean, for pretty much as long as these industries have existed, which is pretty much about 110 years, 120 maybe if you stretch it, but definitely the last 110 years, last little more than a century, they've been doing this, and they've gotten very sophisticated about it in using it. And you've seen an upswing. I mean, you see upswings and downswings over history in this troubling bastardization of culture. But you've seen a real upswing of this, not coincidentally, during the upswing in perpetual warfare by the American empire, which, I mean, the American empire has been at war with no cessation since really since all the way through the latter half of the Clinton regime into the Herbert H. Walker Bush regime, and the into you know, I mean, on and on into the W. Bush and Obama and Trump regimes. It goes on and on, and to help in that perpetual warfare, they need to demonize the enemy. They've always done that. They did it in World War II, certainly. You know, the kinds of racist shit that you saw against Japan. Not that Japan was anything worth worrying over, because they were just as disgustingly imperialist as the American empire was, the Japanese empire at that time. But you know, just the racism, and you see the racism cropping up again as well, really, really badly when you know, something like what those two idiots did with the with North Korea, and um, uh, what the Trump regime has been attempting to do now against China. Big upswing in violence against East Asian appearing people. You know, it doesn't matter whether you're Chinese or not, because as we know, you know, to these kinds of fascistic-minded idiots, you know, anyone who slightly appears Asian is going to be a target, and they'll just say that they were Chinese. Then be surprised afterwards when somebody points out, oh, that was a Japanese person. Japan is on our side. Yeah, it's really quite incredible. That's why we really need to build up our own working class culture, you know, to stand against this kind of shit. At one time in America, we had a great working class culture, as I reviewed a couple of a month and a half ago or so. We need to get back to that too, because we still need to visit the world music and hip hop culture and all of that, which we didn't really touch upon in the last episode of working class culture. Anyway, that's what we really need as a counterbalance to this disgusting form of propaganda. Okay, any more on that?
No.
Next up, the cheering section for World War III. This comes to us from Eric Zuis from the GreenvillePost.com. And remember, that's spelled with a Grean, not two E's, E and an A-N, VILLEPOSTE.com. You can find this article by Eric Zuis. It's pretty good, so I'm going to do some quoting from it. America this is what he says: America repeatedly elects and re-elects champions of regime change in nations abroad. George W. Bush in 2000, Barack Obama in 2008, Donald Trump in 2016, Joe Biden in 2020, such as in Iraq in 2003, in Afghanistan in 2001, in Libya in 2011, and in Syria in 2011 through 2020, and in Yemen 2015 through 2020, and in Ukraine 2010 through 2014. I think he's a little off there, because I mean the civil war in Ukraine is still going on today, and the Trump regime, just exactly like the Obama regime before him, has funded the fascist Ukrainian government in their brutal repressive, racist civil war against Russian-speaking people in the eastern, in the southeastern 1/3 of Ukraine, which is where you said the Ukrainians were fighting the Russians. That's not really the case. What the case is that the fascist Ukrainians are fighting the Russian-speaking Ukrainians, which is about 1/3 of the country, mostly ethnic Russians. And of course, there's a lot of intermarriage in Ukraine too. I mean, so you have a Ukrainian and a Russian, and they get married, and then they have children who are half and half. They speak both languages, but the part of Ukraine which is called Nouveau Russia is a highly industrialized portion of Ukraine, which has always been Russian, and was a part of Russia before 1922, when the Soviet Union, as part of the deal with Ukraine to lure Ukraine into joining the Soviet Union, they gave Ukraine that portion of Russia that became part of Russia. And then the Crimea was given to Ukraine in 1954 by Khrushchev, who was a Ukrainian. So, yeah, I mean, this goes back a long ways, but those people are legitimately Russian. They speak Russian. They live in this foreign country that happened to be part of their union prior to 1992, when they were, when they were separated from the Soviet Union. Anyway, so in Ukraine, back to Zuis's article, and in all instances has destroyed those nations while claiming to be supporting human rights and democracy, and to be opposing corruption in all of those nations that it was actually destroying. Joe Biden, like all 21st century US presidents, except Donald Trump, he says except Donald Trump, wants regime change in Russia. And that would require World War III. Only people who are either very stupid or very evil want that. Which is Joe Biden? Which was Barack Obama? Which was Hillary Clinton, whom Trump had beaten? Which was W. Bush? All of them were supported by the post-World War II permanent Cold War, endless war, Washington establishment, and by the controlling owners of America's international corporations such as Lockheed Martin and ExxonMobil. And therefore, all of them were elected to lead America's government. It's a bipartisan establishment which includes every American billionaire. None of them mobilizes against imperialism or neoconservatism, and which chooses the president and almost all congressional nominees of both of America's two political parties. I would differ with him there. I would say all congressional nominees of both of America's two major political parties, the twin capitalist parties, Democrat and Republican. So Americans always elect such leaders in this permanent warfare democracy. Quote, democracy, that's in quotation marks. But it's going to war against Russia. A real war against Russia would be different, because that would be a nuclear war, all out, instantaneous, and all of the weapons on both sides would be launched within less than an hour. There would be no looking back and correcting strategic errors, no recalibrations, no second guesses. It would be historically unique, and all of the guesses would be made within that few minutes long period and would be final. Rainer?
Right, right. This sounds like an overall overview of the whole war machine apparatus that's moving towards this Third World War. The thing about the anti-Russian propaganda of the last decade is it blames it puts all the blame on Putin and fabricates a lot of the villainy for Putin to be pinned upon in terms of what's wrong with the situation in Ukraine. The fact is that the Crimeans overwhelmingly voted to join Russia because they were uncertain about the government that they would be under after the unconstitutional installation of a new government earlier that year in 2014. And this government that had been installed within Ukraine that year, I think it was February when it was installed, and it might have been March when Crimea voted to be annexed. This government was neo-Nazi. It was the most right-leaning regime that Washington could pick, and Washington clearly had its hands within the transition process towards a new government following that year's unrest. This was an extremely dangerous regime to live under, especially for all those ethnic Russians in that part of Ukraine. And later that year, this new Ukrainian government started engaging in ethnic cleansing against these peoples. They started persecuting political dissidents, putting journalists and LGBT people and Romas and Jews in danger, and the places that they started putting these ethnic Russians in were called filtration camps, which is just a word away from the other way to describe it. And Washington, all the while, was complicit in this campaign of genocide, all in order to gain this new proxy ally in its military buildup against Russia. So this is the reality of the situation. Whatever criticisms can potentially be made of Putin in this whole situation pale in comparison to the evils that Washington has perpetrated upon the Ukrainian people, and to the ways that Washington has worked to incite violence and destabilization within the region.
Yeah. I will never forget the union leaders in Odessa who were at the Union Temple. I think they called it a Union Temple. It's a big building that dedicated to the unions, or headquarters for many of the unions in Odessa. And they were surrounded by fascist thugs, members of the of one of the many fascist Nazi, really, because they wore Nazi emblems, Nazi militias, and then the building was set on fire. So I think it was more than 80 union leaders were burned to death inside there. That's the kind of terrorist acts that this fascist government sponsored and installed by the Obama regime is guilty of. It was a terrible, terrible thing. I still remember it today. I'll never forget it. Yeah, not to mention all just simply lobbing missiles, bombs in on Russian-speaking neighborhoods in southeastern Ukraine. I mean, it's very terrible. That's really been ethnically cleansed because more than 1.5 million people immigrated as refugees to Russia during that period of time. Talk about a humongous, refugee crisis. Imagine, even with a country the size of Russia, which has close to 150 million people, absorbing an extra 1.5 million people in a short period of time is not easy. But they did it. They committed to it. They got all those people jobs. They got all those people into schools, into jobs, and into homes in Russia in that short of a period. They really mobilized and committed to doing that. That's what Russia was doing. I mean, these liars in the State Department try to tell you that Russia was invading Ukraine, which was a total lie from beginning to end. There was absolutely no evidence of that. What they were doing is taking care of a humongous refugee crisis. So anyway. Next point on the list, the sinister end goal of U.S. Xinjiang propaganda. Rainer.
Oh, the perfect lead-in. We just did the perfect lead-in to what I'm about to talk about, because in Xinjiang, the U.S. has been manufacturing this pipeline. You can call it a pipeline from Syria to Western China of religious extremism. Yeah. These terrorist attacks that these religious radicals within Western China have been carrying out have been largely the result of this pipeline of extremist propaganda and radicalization and weapons that the U.S. and Turkey have been fomenting, and their targets have been the Uyghur youth, who they've had the potential to make them turned against the Communist Party of China and hate the Chinese government with all their hearts, to the point where they'll be willing to blow up, shoot their fellow citizens in China, with the end goal of creating the exact same kind of government, basically the exact same kind of government that these Ukrainian neo-Nazis have been able to create. These Uyghur militants have been drawing upon the Israeli settler colonial state, have been drawing upon Zionism as a model for the kind of state that they hope to create within Xinjiang, or as the State Department calls it, East Turkestan. I don't know if the State Department technically calls it East Turkestan, but the State Department sure as heck supports these radical separatist types who seek to create a new state called East Turkestan. And if the World Uyghur Congress, the US-backed World Uyghur Congress, and these radical separatists and these terrorists were to get their way, then much of Western China would be turned into something very much resembling post-coup Ukraine. I mean, one of the goals of these separatists has been to weaponize Uyghurs as a force for proxy warfare against the Chinese government. and they basically want to create an ethno-state. This is pretty clear from they're taking example from Zionism as a model for the kind of governance they want to bring about. So if they were to get their way, they would create a state that would probably impose some kind of ethnic hierarchy. Hopefully not as bad as what's happened in Ukraine, but who knows what the heck would happen in such a situation. And they would use this state to wage a proxy war against the Chinese government. So this is the crazy genocidal fantasy of the imperialist destabilization agents. And this is the implicit purpose behind all of the Uyghur atrocity propaganda that you've been hearing about from the Western media. When the Western media tells you that China is putting Uyghurs in concentration camps, it's to serve this end goal of establishing a proxy war ethno-state within Western China.
Yeah, it's my friend Steve, who lives in Wuhan, China. He was talking about this a couple of weeks ago. Apparently, things have gotten a lot better. I mean, I've read from other sources that things have gotten a lot better in Xinjiang.
For sure.
That China's really got the security situation under control now. But earlier on, it was very, very bad. I mean, this was another deep aspect of the American hybrid asymmetrical warfare against China. This is not just a Cold War. You know, I believe that that's a misnomer to even call it that. This is a cool war, maybe you could call it, in between a hot and a cold war. But yeah, low-level warfare taking place through terrorism, through the sponsorship of terrorist organizations, some of which are the same fucking organizations that attacked the United States of America in 2001, in September 11th, 2001. So, I mean, it's pretty ludicrous that we have allowed Obama and Trump to support these fascists, these Nazis in Ukraine, and to support fucking Al Qaeda in its and ISIS in their attempt to use Xinjiang as a recruiting area for their terrorist wars going on, like in Syria, like in Libya today. It's just amazing. Anyway, according to Steve, things have gotten a lot better. I mean, early on, when Steve, first few years Steve moved to Wuhan, there were, terrorist bombings in Wuhan from these terrorist organizations that the United States pays for. Many, at least one of which, Al Qaeda, attacked us in 2001 and killed more than 3,000 people. So the fact that I do not understand how Obama and Trump have gotten away with not being arrested and tried on charges of treason for this, but we live in an insane country today. And I don't think Biden's going to be any better. Go ahead. What did you say?
Well, why would it be treason? Since that what they've done has been with the goal of serving U.S. interests. You mean like in terms of supporting Al Qaeda?
Yeah. How does that serve U.S. interests? That serves capitalist ruling class interests. That serves the interests of
pretty synonymous. U.S. interests synonymous with capitalist interests. It's the same structure of empire. So
Yeah, well,
No
that's
president
what
is
we've
going.
got to. That's what we've got to start to put an end to, because it's not the same. The American public has absolutely no interest in World War III. The American public has absolutely no interest in waging hybrid asymmetrical warfare against China, in hiring these same terrorists who attacked America on 9/11, 2001, hiring these same fuckers to go in and attack China. That doesn't, there's no interest that that the American people have in that. Our interests are in putting an end to that, in my opinion.
Right. I mean, I don't want to go too far in being cynical about how I view the American public, because every American is complicit in some way, but that's a pretty broad-reaching argument, kind of a truism that everyone who's part of an oppressor country could do more in some instance to put an end to this oppression. But I don't want to put too much shame upon those around me or upon myself. I don't want to self-flagellate. I don't want to become cynical about who I trust. I mean, people have tried to make the argument that the masses within the United States, particularly the settler masses, like how Jay Saki describes, have kind of a common interest with the U.S. ruling class in terms of imperialism, but it's more complex than that. There's plenty of ways that imperialism works to the detriment of the American public, like through siphoning resources to the military, and through creating this general miserable society. Caitlin Johnstone has observed how imperialist violent propaganda has played a role, most likely, in the prevalence of mass shootings within the U.S. There's a quote from somebody, I don't remember who, but he said, a nation can't be free as long as it oppresses other nations, and this is has been proven to be the case for the U.S. We're kind of drinking the poison of our own misdeeds perpetually, and this self-destructive evil won't end until the anti-imperialist movement defeats the United States.
Well, that's true. I mean, it's true that a nation can't be free stepping on, just stepping on other people's faces to lift itself up. But I truly don't believe that the majority of people in America want that to be the case, want our country to be like that. And many of them are not even aware of this, because they are so hoodwinked by the mass media. But anyway, that's a good point, that we need more consciousness on that. We need more anti-imperialist, anti-colonialist consciousness. But I've never been one. My father worked for the CIA fucking all his adult life. He was a fucking mass murdering criminal. Okay, and because of that, and I've been a communist all my life, I really don't abide by this nonsense that you visit the sins of the father on the son. It's not, I do not think that's a good way to think. That's an old, medieval kind of way of thinking, that anything the father does, those sins are naturally visited on the son. It depends on how the son acts in his or her, his life, or the daughter in her life. That's what it depends on. It depends on how you think, how you act. Have you been anti-imperialist all your life? or all your, conscious adult life or whatever, you're not even, well, I guess you are technically an adult since you're over 18, but I mean, you've only been an adult for a year or two, but you've already gained this consciousness. You're winning yourself away from that. Now, does the nation as a whole have a collective guilt, a collective responsibility? Yes, that's what reparations are for. That's what moving on to something better is for. That's why certain oppressed peoples in the United States really do deserve reparations, and we should all support reparations. But, I think we need to get away from the, Sake's kind of anti-Marxist madness, anti-Marxist-Leninist madness, where he wants to pretend that there's no working class in the United States.
Hello, everyone. There was a delay. He was making a very inspirational speech about restorative justice.
Yeah, there you go. And I have no clue where I left off. I'll have to review this and see. But, my main point is don't visit the sins of the father on the son. And if you're the son, make sure that you, live a better life and don't become a CIA fucking criminal like my father was. That's the best I can do, I loved my father. It's not that I hated him or anything like that, but he was a fucking criminal, in my opinion. He was a personnel manager in the CIA. That's the CIA's goofy terminology for an HR guy. So he hired people, fired people. He was right at the root, finding the criminals and hiring them to do the crimes against other nations around the world. I don't take any responsibility for that. I've spent my whole life fighting against that and will continue to fight against that kind of criminality and to fight to make my country, my nation, the United States of America is what it's called now. I think it should be called something different, but to make Americans, America into a country that we can be proud of, and to totally disassemble the capitalist state that has committed all these crimes in our names. And you know what they use? There's even an organization, Not in Our Name. Not in Our Names, I think it's called. That's my attitude. But, to each their own. If Sake wants to think, that there is no working class in America and that all Americans are guilty, blah, blah, blah. There is some collective guilt, but how do you address that guilt? Do you sit there in misery and think, oh, what was me? What can I do? Or do you stand up and try to correct the situation? Do you try to turn it around so that we are not committing these crimes against other nations and against other nationalities within the United States?
Right.
That's what I believe in doing. So anyway, more on that, Rainer?
I think that if the American label were to be removed from our collective language, what would likely replace it is Turtle Island, which would mean not exactly a country, but be a blanket term for the continent as a whole. And these individual nations, these individual First Nations would likely comprise what we call the countries that we live within. It's because it's likely that in a situation of decolonization, these nations would take on the role as the countries effectively within their individual regions, with the continent taking on an overall broad-reaching name, likely Turtle Island. Turtle Island is the indigenous name that I always hear thrown around to describe this continent.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't take position on something like that. I mean, I take the Marxist-Leninist position on that kind of thing, which is self-determination. So we Marxist-Leninists, we communists, we support self-determination for nations, for nationalities, you know, it's up to them. It's not up to me. It's certainly not up to you and I to determine issues like that. You know, I mean, an issue like that's going to have to be determined by, really by whole, in my opinion, by, you know, through democratic process, through a long discussion. We'll see how things turn out. I'm not going to try to predetermine anybody's self-determination. I don't think that's right. You know, that's where I stand on it.
Which is why I said likely, because I've been thinking about this stuff for a while, and by the way, I got the vision that I just described for a future on this continent from an indigenous communist who I've been taking theoretical lessons from since I met him, and he's broadened my perspective, because prior to then I was one of those socialists who assumed that we could just convert the United States into the socialist United States, something along those lines. But I cringe at those days. I had been not been a communist for very long at that point, and I've developed my line further since then.
Yeah, I look forward to a time when we can put all this nationalism crap aside. You can't put aside the issues of oppressed nations while they're still being oppressed. That needs to be addressed. But we can certainly start putting aside the nationalism of capitalist imperialist nations like the United States. We can put that aside. And I'm an internationalist. I believe in a global socialist revolution, workers' revolution. I believe in a global governmental entity that brings all humanity together without all this nationalist crap. Because, frankly, nationalism, you know, it was a necessary journey we had to go through, but I look back on it as being a pretty despicable phase of human history. The whole nationalist age that started at the beginning of the 19th century, I guess. The rise of nationalism. Before that, a whole lot of nations didn't think of themselves as nations. And I look towards the time when nations don't think of themselves as nations anymore. They think of themselves as humanity. And I think that's the goal of communism. That's the goal of Marxism, Leninism. So that's been my goal for my whole adult life. And don't see any reason to change it now. Anyway, we've got one more point. This is also on China. Kind of flows from the last point. on the Xinjiang situation, Hong Kong situation, the situation of the United States using terrorism against China. Anyway, this is looking forward to the new regime coming in. Biden talks about China-U.S. relations as U.S. espionage chief calls China the greatest threat to democracy since World War II. Now, part of this was already mentioned in another story, but we'll go into it because this part's mainly concerned with Emperor-elect Joe Biden, who on Friday differentiated himself in style, but not in practice, from the outgoing Emperor Donald Trump. Biden said he would not blame China for COVID-19. Oh, how magnanimous of him. But would hold them to abiding by international norms. Talk about projection and hypocrisy. And that's actually what we've been talking about a lot tonight. The United States is the ultimate. The projection is a psychobabble word that means you project onto others what's inside you. And the American capitalist class and the American rulers, the American establishment projects all of its crimes onto other people, even though other people are the victims. You know, this is the worst case of outright pinning your own crimes on the victim I can remember hearing about in a long, long time. Also, John Ratcliffe, U.S. Director of National Intelligence, said if there were one thing he would tell the incoming president, it would be that China poses the greatest threat to America today. Now, I believe personally that he's correct. I think Ratcliffe is correct, because China's mere existence as the most successful ever socialist workers' state and a great example for the rest of the world is the greatest threat to the American empire that it has ever faced.
Okay, so it sounds like Biden is going to try to use the language of virtue signaling, was one way to describe it, to justify these hybrid warfare moves that he'll make against China. I wonder how Biden will handle the situation in Hong Kong, where China, in spite of this wave of violence that the U.S. has unleashed upon Hong Kong in this last year or so, has decidedly won the battle within the city. The battle over geopolitical control over Hong Kong. China has cracked down severely, made it impossible for the NED to engage in the kinds of violent subversion that it was able to engage in last year. I remember seeing a photo of Joshua Wong in jail recently, and he was just vibing. It seems like he's accepted his fate. This rhetoric about international norms, it'll be applied to issues like Taiwan and Hong Kong, and we'll no doubt see rhetoric from Washington, the State Department, and State Department adjacent media, maybe even some of those sectarian anarchists too, that has to do with vilifying China in terms of Taiwan, Hong Kong, Tibet, Xinjiang, etc.
Yeah.
The narrative is that China is cracking down on the freedoms of these peoples, and this is used in all of these cases to justify imperialist subversion. it seems like in terms of Hong Kong, the long-term fear that the empire has is that they'll lose this great economic outpost a few decades from now, when China finally reabsorbs Hong Kong and Hong Kong is fully decolonized. They want to keep neo-colonial control over Hong Kong, as do many of the more reactionary types within Hong Kong who've been willing to light a man on fire out of their passionate hatred for communism. So I worry that these Hong Kong protests, these horrendously violent, reactionary, Nazi-affiliated Hong Kong protests we've seen this last year, won't be the last subversion attempts we'll see within the city. Maybe they'll what will they try next? Will they try to enact Xinjiang style terrorist attacks within Hong Kong or Taiwan?
Yeah, well, I'm sure that they're trying to cook stuff up. What I've been amazed at is how incredibly agile and just brilliant the Chinese Communist Party has been in outflanking Biden before he even becomes the new emperor of the American empire. That's what I've been amazed. I mean, that new trade collective that China announced a couple of weeks ago, just an incredible outflanking, pulling the rug right out from Biden before he got a chance to start. And on top of that, I mean, refer back to what we talked about earlier about the Trump, the outgoing Trump regime doing everything it can to sabotage Biden coming in, and to lock Biden into a certain into the same Obama Trump policies, imperialist policies against China, to lock them, and not that Biden needs to be locked into that, because Biden is obviously totally committed to it. So, yeah, I'm sure that these insidious criminals in the CIA are cooking something up. Who knows what it'll be? Who knows where? But it'll be something. So that's our show tonight. Good job, Rainer, as always. And thank everyone, all our audience, for tuning in, for listening, for watching. And we'll be back next week. In the meantime, hasta la vista, Rainer. Hasta la vista, everybody.